Just very quickly, I'm sure you know roughly what Brighteye does if you're here, but we invest in early stage learning and work companies across Europe. So if you're building something, we'd love to hear from you. If you're looking to work more closely with startups, we'd also love to hear from you. But the session today, very pleased to be speaking with you all on this session on AI in marketing. We have two perfect people to talk with us today. So the first one, Lauren, VP of Marketing at Sana, one of the architects behind the company's runaway success in recent years, and also behind some of what must be considered some of the cleanest marketing outputs seen in SaaS. Plus, their events looking really clean. So I think I think there's going to be lots of hopefully useful insights there. And also, if you're here, you'll probably be aware that Sana was acquired or announced its acquisition by Workday a couple of weeks ago. Lauren, I'd love to hear, your take, your introduction, and hopefully that roughly chimes with what you would also say.
Oh, I thought you did it very well and very gracious of you as well. So thank you. It's really nice to be here. I've been with now for 4.5 years, joining just after the Series A when we were about 25 people, and then reaching the 300 plus employee status now. And then, of course, our recent news with the definitive agreement to be acquired by Workday and becoming a Swedish unicorn is a really proud moment for us and European AI more broadly. So we're really excited for the next adventure and to keep our game up on the clean marketing, Rhys, and keep that up.
Awesome, thank you. And we're also very pleased to be joined by Amy, VP of Growth at WPP, world's most foremost marketing agency, behind some of the most iconic campaigns of recent times, with tentacles that are no doubt reaching more or less all of our feeds and screens. So, Amy, same intro query to you.
Lovely. Thanks, Rhys. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Spurgeon from WPP, VP of Growth. I've been with the company now, gosh, coming on 8 years in a whole bunch of different capacities across the world, from Australia to Singapore, across Europe and now in America. So yeah, very excited to be here. Yeah, WPP's an amazing platform for all of the above. So I think there'll be some really cool things that Lauren and I will share with you today. But yeah, super excited to be here.
Great. So we're going to be running through some of Amy and Lauren's top takeaways on the use of AI in marketing, and kind of in chronological order. We'll hopefully have a little bit of time for questions. So please share them in the chat as they arise. And I can flag Lauren or Amy, and also I'm sure they'll see some of them coming through and be able to address them directly. So please do share them. Now, we know that every company and every leader's sort of AI journey is pretty variable. But if you were to describe your journey so far in your discovery of AI and your use of AI in one word, what would that one word be? And perhaps we could start with Lauren, if that's okay.
Mm, this is a good first question. If we're being strict on the one word, then I'm going to say illuminating.
Mm, cool. Very good. Look forward to discovering why. And Amy, what would yours be?
Yeah, I agree. It's always hard to narrow it down to one word, but I would say colorful, and I mean that in the sense of you got to mix a lot of colors to get a good output, and you can mix the same colors again and again and again and get different colors, and it's all about that kind of very colorful experimentation. So that would be my word.
Nice. Very good, very good. So diving into some slightly more serious questions. So Lauren, Sana is an AI company and an AI first company, and Amy WPP is investing 300 million a year in the development of different horizontal and vertical technologies. So your markets are moving really quickly. How is AI changing the way that startups specifically should be thinking about their marketing strategy and planning more broadly? And perhaps we could start with Lauren on this one.
Yeah. So I would guiding piece of advice would be that you don't need to waste your time on 12-month marketing plans anymore. I truly believe that the success of any marketing team today lies in the team's ability to act decisively and continue to plan or plan continuously. And if you think about that in the context of the AI era and Sana's case specifically, where we're building AI products in literally the fastest moving category in the history of software, we simply don't have that luxury of creating these kinds of plans and strategies anymore. You'll wake up one morning, you'll see OpenAI has released its next model, and the game has changed, and you're reconsidering everything all over again. So it's
Mm.
been refreshing and also challenging to see that era of marketing as coming to an end. But I would encourage everyone here to embrace it. And it really doesn't have to mean that you're entering a situation of total chaos. At Sana, the way that we've tried to create focus in this kind of complex environment is essentially by setting a clear long-term KPI that the team is rallying around, and then making sure that the team is empowered with a set of marketing principles, almost like a set of heuristics that can then facilitate the decision making a bit more on the fly. And in our case, those principles are: one, stay close to revenue; two, explore generously but exploit ruthlessly; three, there's no such thing as BAU in a startup; four, respect the brand and the marketing; and five, don't be the copycat. And so we use those to guide what we want to do, what we can't do. And on top of that, as a company, we also set 6-month goals for every team. And then we run mini planning cycles every 6 weeks to keep
Mm.
pace and allow us to reprioritize towards the goal. So in marketing's case, it's usually something connected towards brand. And then we have a harder inbound qualified pipeline metric to that point about staying close to revenue. And we found that that does a really good job of keeping people motivated and creating a certainty around a lot of uncertainty, and still providing that forcing function for fast delivery and output.
Terrific. I have lots of questions, but I'd love to get
Yeah.
Amy's take on the same question, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I would agree and echo what Lauren shared there, just in terms of the way that we think about marketing strategy certainly has evolved. Things aren't as linear as they once were, even in the way that you deploy media. It's just not a straightforward line as it once was. And so when you start to think about it, it's breaking it down into those chunks, whether it's 6 years, 6 months, 6 weeks, 6 days, or your nines, or whatever number you choose that sings to your heart. But my key thing, I think, when we start to think about this, especially in the world of a startup, is like hyperscale from day one. We've done some really interesting pilots of getting brands, and more specifically a beer company recently, of like getting them out at hyperscale super fast and having those consistent feedback cycles. AI is allowing you to do that now. It's allowing you to move at rapid pace so that you can test, deploy, get feedback, and then pivot depending on what the result is. And so having a plan around that hyperscalability from day one that coincides with that broader USP or your broader long-term strategy, whatever those goals might look like, I think is super, super important. Yeah, just it's a very interesting place to be right now. Both WPP Open and Sana allow you to create these assets at rapid speed. And so
Mm.
where are they living? What are they going to look like? How are you going to test them? What are those metrics? And just making sure that they do align to that broader long-term strategy as well.
Awesome. That's really sound advice, and also very interesting to hear the perspectives from the beer company.
Mm.
And so you mentioned the consistent feedback cycles. Would you be able to expand a little on that point?
Yeah, I mean, with anything, I think in previous times we would go, I came from a traditional TV production background, right? And so you'd make an ad and then you'd send it out to a few focus groups, and then you go on air and then you'd see the sales results afterwards, and you go through this very linear place. I think at the moment, what we can see, especially when you think about the digital, programmatic, social, retail media, any of these environments where you're essentially placing ads, you're able to collect this feedback. And to be honest, it's overwhelming the amount of data points that you can now collect after coming through any sort of activation. And so it's going, okay, what are our metrics? Is it revenue? Is it impressions? What are the thing that you're benchmarking it against? And having, lots of different test cases out in market to understand what these might look like, using those benchmarks, looking at them in real time and pivoting if we need to move on from one that's not working. I think it's just really important to have that really clear foundation in terms of those KPIs so that you can do that piece. Yeah, consistent feedback is easily found these days. It's about how you interpret the data for sure.
Yes, we keep hearing that actually. We
Yeah.
had a product market fit session yesterday about rapid experimentation, and
Right. Cool.
the main point that everyone was taking from it, well, the main point that was being made was experiments are only as useful as the information and insights you extrapolate from them, and assuming
Totally.
that you extrapolate the right information from them.
Yeah.
And I guess, Lauren, in Sana's case, you mentioned your five key principles. What does sort of experimentation look like alongside those five key principles, or is the idea that those five key principles sort of limit what feels like an experiment versus what you're certain will succeed?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that explore versus exploit principle is where experimentation comes most into the fold. It's about when you don't actually really know if something is working, and understanding that context and respecting that things are going to be messier and a bit more unknown, and you might need to be a bit more conservative with your resources, etc. And to the other principle about there being no such thing as BAU in a startup, you typically don't have the luxury of being able to give all attention to all channels at any one time,
Mm.
especially if you're at the early stage. You're trying to understand what even are your marketing motions, what are your growth loops if you have PLG, and so on. You everything at the same time. So understanding that you might need to be running these kinds of explorative tests early on, with more limited resources, and then to Amy's point about being really clear about what is the signal then that that thing
Mm.
is actually working and is worth you doubling down on, and then transferring it over into that different state. And you could think about it in the 70-20-10 framework. Like, you want maybe 70% of your resources going towards the stuff that you know is working and to exploit it, the 20% on exploration, the experimentation, and then maybe 10% on a moonshot. And
Mhm.
then understanding when are you transferring those things over. Although
mm
maybe Amy would say that experiment, that 30% should be going up in this
mm.
context, maybe.
Interesting. Yeah, and not to put you on the spot, but what would a Sana moonshot look like?
Oh, we've had a couple actually. So Sana AI Summit is probably the best
Uh,
example of our moonshot. That's our flagship AI conference, which has taken place in Stockholm every year for the past 3 years. And uh, it was a moonshot because at the time when we decided to do it, we were a team of three people full time. And we had this ambition of 500 C-suite executives from Europe's leading companies coming to a converted church in Stockholm and listening to conversations about AI from a bunch of different perspectives. So, a C-suite executive listening to a philosopher, or Jeanette Winterson, the author, reflecting on the impact of AI across disciplines. It wasn't a given something that people would immediately say yes to. But I
mm
think we trusted our intuition at that time that this category of enterprise AI was emerging from nowhere, and there was a space to claim from a thought leadership perspective, even if no one really knew exactly what this AI enterprise AI category was. And so we took this leap as a small team. We worked really, really hard. It paid off. Now it's been something that is sort of shifting, right? Not, I wouldn't say it's something that we're exploiting because it's always risky.
mm
We've learned what the model is, and we've continued to evolve it over time. That
mm.
would be my best example.
That's very cool. That's very cool. And also, I guess, like a helpful reminder that some of the biggest, most impactful branding and marketing efforts you can have aren't necessarily, they are in the very much in the real world as opposed to in sort of the digital. Um,
Mm.
which is I think a nice case. And I guess, Amy, what is it? What would a moonshot look like for you guys on your side? Because obviously, given sort of the level of investment that you're putting through the company at the moment, I'd love to hear what that would look like.
Yeah, that's a bit of a tricky question, I must admit, from my perspective. But I mean, similar to Lauren, we launched our stream capabilities. If those aren't familiar, it's an ongoing event, very similar from the CMO perspective, and very well regarded, hard to get invite kind of style, but
Mm.
keep it at this level of, some very, very interesting speakers, and similar to the session today, really focused on takeaways. It's like, how do you educate? How do you support people that come through? And we're actually running a stream AI, a separate version this year, specifically talking to the evolution of AI and marketing. So, a very hot topic at the moment.
Mm.
I don't know if that necessarily classifies as a moonshot in the WPP landscape, but it certainly is a pivot and an evolution of something that was once originally a moonshot for sure.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. Yeah, there you go. I mean, it's an example of a moonshot that works, that
Yeah,
you double down on. So, lots of things start as
double
moonshots, I
moonshot.
guess. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so moving into a question about how, AI is transforming the speed with which sort of different marketing approaches can be developed, and also given sort of the speed, there's obviously an enhanced possibility, breadth around the type of marketing that you can put together, and etc. So in that amplified environment, what
Mm.
what kind of tips might you have around strategic discipline for marketing leaders to ensure that they're harnessing that speed as effectively as possible, and not just
Mm.
adding to the sense of there being more and more noise within your marketing? And I'd love to start with Amy on this one, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's a great question. As we know, AI can accelerate a really bad problem quite quickly. So, yeah, the challenge I always give in, sorry, the piece of advice I always give in this one is start with the problem. I'm not sure if you've seen the recent ad from Claude, but it's a great time to have a problem. It's a great
Mm,
time to not know what you're doing or not be able to solve something. The challenge with that is that you still need to be able to articulate very clearly what is your business plan, what is your marketing strategy, and get it down on paper in some capacity, have some sort of, overarching theme direction that you're going, because once you start to layer in AI, that's where we start to see the train run off in a very specific direction. I've certainly had my many chats with chat over the time, and you've ended up in these rabbit holes and you're going, I don't even know what we're talking about at this point. So like, you need to have that really clear problem as you're starting to go into it. You can utilize obviously the technology to support you in getting there. There's some really good strategic tools out there these days, and certainly included within WPP Open. But it's really about getting those brain dumps out, getting everything on paper so that you can reorganize all of your thoughts. Because as we know, speed is amplified, but it doesn't necessarily drive the direction with AI. And I think building on that, AI is always going to solve the problem that you give it, but it might not necessarily be the right problem. So it's really just coming back to that and going, what are we planning on doing? I think, when you think about it in the lens of, assets and marketing and delivery of different platforms or products, etc., it's like, is the challenge that we've outlined with the people, with the audience, all of those kind of things, the right challenge to be having in this environment? And then obviously having human clarity to input on top of that, and really just taking a step back and going, is this the core thing that we need to be solving for the minute? We had a recent example of building a lot of tools at the moment that talk more strategically about unpacking briefs and looking at challenges from different angles. And I think it's quite interesting. We put in a very high-end luxury brand case recently and said, this is the outline or the challenge that we thought was the problem as per defined by the brief. And what it spat out was that this high-end luxury brand should be going mass market, because we hadn't defined the problem properly, right? And if you put this in the hands of somebody who doesn't understand that, then we're going, hey, multi-million dollar brand, you should go mass market. And it's just like absolutely detrimental, right? So it's like defining the
mm.
problem properly in the initial instant will help guide that direction. But I think that's super important.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, that's good. And I think, and to your sort of first point, I mean, because there's so much possibility, it's almost like just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should. Just because
Doesn't
those
mean you should.
possibilities are available doesn't mean you should. Um,
Exactly.
and it
And
doesn't
I
mean
think
that you should sort of, yeah, sorry, go on.
Oh no, you go. Sorry.
I mean, I was gonna basically ask Lauren if that is generally sort of how you guys think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's perhaps a discussion coming later on where we can get into
Mm.
that nitty-gritty
Mm,
of if you
Yeah.
can, should you, and why, both from a team perspective and maybe a brand perspective too. I think one
mm,
very practical thing, perhaps to add on top of what Amy was saying, which is connected to data sources, frankly.
Mm.
And of course, I'm biased. We have a Sana has an agentic platform. The whole principle is that you build these agents that are connected to company data sources,
mm,
and that you want to be very intentional about the context window that each agent or assistant has, and
mm,
uh, yeah, you can end up with generic or incorrect output as a function of whatever the LLM or the agent has access to. So being really thoughtful about the right data sources that you might want a specific agent to have. In Sana's case, for example, we've been experimenting with rather than just having a general tone of voice agent that's grounded in the company's tone of voice. We've been in
mm,
testing to see whether we get better output when we have uh, sort of content agents that are connected to specific use cases, like one for building case studies and another one for thought leadership on social media, etc. Because then we can
mm,
ground each agent in more specific references and data points and give it a more focused context to ensure a better quality on the other end. But to what we will
mm.
discuss later, we're still producing a lot with human hands,
Mm.
of course.
I
Awesome.
think it's an interesting point, Lauren, as you start to like dissect it in that space, because I think the core marketing challenge, like what is your business problem? What is your value proposition? What is your key objective? What is your target audience? Those things, those building blocks of marketing still remain the same. But as you're dissecting them out in those ways, you're able to come at those kind of four quadrants from, thought leadership and social media. Like what's the challenge? What's the solution? What's the key audience? And being able to kind of have those agents interacting based off that foundation, I think is a super interesting way
Yeah,
to slice and dice the lens.
yeah, and I think to your earlier point, Amy, that original foundation of like what is the ground truth that
Mm,
you want your agent to have access to beyond just tone of voice and like you say. But one thing that we've been experimenting with for the marketing team specifically is having like one playbook, a master playbook of
mhm,
everything about our philosophy for marketing, specific information about the products and the audiences, etc. And it's written in a way where obviously any human coming into the
yeah,
team can read it and be inspired by it, but it's also written in a way that's effective for an LLM to be able to read it too,
mm,
and to essentially have that as like one kind of master source that everyone in the team could be updating continuously, so that you don't end up in a state where you're having to constantly check whether your agents are connected to uh, not
right.
out of date sources, which is a big risk. Even if you are able to connect agents to all your company's knowledge, then you have to make sure it's connected to the right knowledge as well.
Agree.
Perfect. And we just started sort of talking about talent and how you manage sort of your team's information. And also, of course, the key question there is how do you make sure that you're hiring people that are able to, have the skills or develop the skills that enable them to really thrive in an environment where they are interacting so frequently with different types of technology, different types of solutions. And so, Lauren, are you sort of changing the profile of the people that you're hiring within your marketing team at the moment in light of the changing situation that we're seeing, or what are your reflections on that?
Yeah, so not really, but I think that's because we actually had a talent philosophy that, unbeknown to us, was very well suited for this context. Sana has always geared, well, focusing pie-shaped generalists into the company across, I mean, virtually every single team, as opposed to very, very narrow specialists. And I think that this concept of the pie-shaped marketing generalist becomes even more important in this AI first world. And if you compare it to probably what the way things have evolved traditionally, where marketing has kind of skewed people towards more narrow functions. You might hire a performance marketer, and then you have a product marketer, and then you have a brand marketer, and that's the way your team over time. But given how fast moving this landscape is, and also the kinds of capabilities that, especially if the tasks are repetitive, your agents will be able to take on and execute, hopefully semi autonomously over time, very, very narrow specialists might struggle to keep pace in that kind of
Mm.
environment. So I think you really want people who can flex and respond to the strategy as it's emerging. And I think
Mhm.
very concretely, when you're hiring and if you're thinking about growing the marketing team, I would think about maybe these three questions. Number one, will they be able to handle hybrid teams of people and AI agents? Number
Mm.
two, can they devise and execute multi-channel campaigns end to end with a
Mm.
consistently high bar? And I think this we'll get to this later. This is also a bit of a proxy for talking about whether a person has taste and the ability to discern high quality and across a range of different channels and outputs, and to know when do you want to lean on AI to execute something versus when should a human do it, when do you want to bring the two together. And then the last question I would ask is, do they have, or at least if they're junior, will they have the ability to develop over time skills in at least two sub functions, e.g., product marketing and demand generation, or brand and creative plus product marketing? When we're hiring, we're typically looking for that kind of potential, or at least evidence of that in the past. Can they stretch? Can they
Mm.
flex across different areas? Because we don't, at least I wouldn't want our team to end up in a situation where the sub functions are so well rooted because people feel very attached to them that they start to generate a strategy based on the sub functions, not the other way around. We want
Mm.
to create the conditions where the the org structure is emerging from the strategy. And if you have people
Mm.
that are capable of working across different sub functions, those people can essentially reorganize themselves around the strategy in a way where they don't feel like they're losing anything because they're just focused on, okay, how do we attack this problem, as opposed
Mm.
to what does my function typically do in a company of this size or a company of this industry.
Mm.
That's super interesting, and for some reason, it makes me think about football squads,
Mm,
in a sense, because you know how you've got your core 11 in your best 11 that will start every game, or that's the point, I guess. They won't start every game, and so you try to build basically a team of people that are role players that are capable of like slotting into different parts of different teams that align with the strategy and align with the opposition that you're trying
mm.
to play against. I'm not sure if the metaphor perfectly works, but it does in my mind. It feels very close to Arsenal at the
No,
moment. So that's
I think it holds. And I mean, in Sana's case, our team is seven full-time employees for a company that's nearly 300 people.
Mm.
And then we have a
wow.
small halo around that of some specialists and experts and freelancers, where we want, if the pie-shaped Sanian, as we call them,
Mm.
problem and that problem is repeatable, they should either be handing it off to an agent or a freelancer so that they can take that task off their plate and start solving bigger, bigger, more interesting problems over time.
Mm. Yeah. Thanks for not shooting the idea down.
Maybe it's because
Um,
I'm not very knowledgeable about football, so it sounded
Football,
excellent to
yeah.
me.
I was like, sounds great.
good. And so we've heard about pie-shaped employees and team members. And Amy, I believe you're at WPP. It's more M-shaped. I'd love to hear a bit more
Yes.
about that.
Yeah, yeah, it's similar philosophy, but the evolution of it, I think, and because we operate in the one operating system, we are very horizontal, we are very vertical in what WPP Open offers. So we've dug super deep into those key capabilities, and I think it's interesting when you start to think about it because AI does empower you to be multidisciplinary. So when we looked at that beer case study, essentially what we did was 4 half-day sprints of 4 people in a room trying to achieve what would typically take about 6 months from brand strategy, full execution of, a hero campaign as well as a seasonal campaign. And so in that room, we had account, a CRM, and a media and a commerce guy. And so we'll go. And so essentially allowed each each of those to become super multidisciplinary. So it's the media people, the people who typically focus on the placement, the execution, the sponsorships, whatever that looks like, to also be the creative people because they know what's going to work in that environment a lot of the time, right? You go, you can't put this ad here because it's not going to perform as well because I've seen it a million times with Coke and Ford and whatever other company I've worked with, right? And so the M-shaped talent allows you to dig really deep, but it's the cross-disciplinary piece that allows you to really bolster that marketing strategy. I think further to that, though, it really, and Lauren kind of touched on this before in terms of like the hiring process, it's also thinking, you know, when you're interviewing people, do they display a curiosity culture mindset? Right? Like, are they the type of people who would pick up a pen and look into a different challenge, a problem, go deep on a macro or a micro challenge, or a niche audience or something like that? We've had some really cool case studies that have come out of that where someone's gone, oh, interested in that. Let's follow that thread, and you bring the other people along for the journey because they've got the M-shaped ability to dig deep into CRM, into commerce, into media, and combine these things, and the curiosity to go, oh, that's super interesting. I wonder how that would apply for the brand that I'm working with. And so I think it's a combination of those soft skills as well, of really being like, how do you get people to remain curious in this environment and leverage the skills that they have? And so whenever I've been employing, I've mostly run sales teams throughout my lifetime, but I think it's still one of those really key values where you go, do you think this person's curious or not? Because if they're not, I don't know how well this is going to go. And so I think that's a really interesting one as you start to think about the foundation of building up teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess one thing that I guess aligns with this from our side is we see a lot of portfolio companies prioritizing hiring chiefs of staff for
Mm.
different C-suite team
Hmm.
members and founders associates for different team members, obviously mostly the founders. But the idea being that you hire people that you believe are, fantastic generalists
Mm.
at first, and then of course they start to sort of either slot within the specific function that they're most needed in, and then focus, or they are splitting between sort of different areas. And I feel like it generally aligns, and a lot of companies are having a lot of success with that. I think one of our portfolio companies, Educate, has had sort of 4 or 5 different chiefs of staff over the past
Hmm.
few years, most of which are now sort of C-level people
Yeah.
within their
Yeah.
organization. And I think it seems like it makes a lot of sense to create that pipeline of
Yeah.
company leaders that also have broader company knowledge based on the fact they were chiefs of staff across,
Of course.
large parts of the business. So um,
Mm.
yeah, that's
I agree.
definitely rings true to what we see as well. We briefly sort of touched on the importance of critical thinking
Mm.
skills within this age we're in, and of course we've been talking about people, the team side quite a lot as well. So Amy, if AI can now generate limitless content.
Yeah.
And also relatively sophisticated, strategy decks that perhaps you haven't even, critically thought about yourself as a
Mm.
company leader in cases. What, what would be your recommendations to companies to make sure that they think critically through this sort of very noisy environment? And also,
Yeah.
I guess, what are sort of the most valuable and scarce resources that marketers should be thinking about within that context?
Context. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a really important question as we look down the future of where marketing and AI is happening. Because, I mean, content is no longer scarce, as you said. Like, strategy decks are everywhere. Everyone's got about 1,700 of them typically, and with lots of slides that nobody reads, right? And so I think in this environment, it's really about critical thinking. Like, we're seeing less of the ability to ask the right questions and challenge the obvious answer. And it's more about how do you develop the discernment within this to go, actually, this is the right piece. Lauren spoke about taste earlier, and jump in if you want to as well. But like, I think one of the most valuable things that we have is our opinion. It's our point of view right now. And it gives you the opportunity to kind of add your flavor, add your flair along with that baseline of discernment to go, actually, yeah, this does make sense. And I do think that that's the competitive edge in marketing, because AI has definitely democratized the output. Everything has become flat. You could build out a billion case studies. And that same beer one that I mentioned before, we times the volume by 33, right? And so if you think
Mm,
about over 4 days, we're getting 33 times more content than what was available in a 6 month sprint. It's not about mass production of assets. It's about the discernment and the quality, because the obvious answer isn't always necessarily the right one. So
mm,
it's like critical thinking is allowing us to ask those right questions. And so when we think about like what that practically looks like as we're developing our teams in marketing, sales, I'd say that this applies to most functions. It's not isolated just to marketing in this scenario, but think about building critical thinking as a core competency within your performance plans. So like, how do you measure that? What does that look like? Is it owning the strategic integrity and the brand alignment? Is it they've been able to identify context or propose, I guess, more human nuance, or an alternative? Like, what are those key benchmarks and key things that you're able to develop your teams and have them working towards as a forefront of what you're thinking, so that you're not creating an ecosystem of complacency and reliancy on AI and just kind of relying, well, the LLM said it was right. There's been so many scenarios where you go,
mm,
oh, yeah, that's right. Especially when we were kind of learning how to play with the Lego, for want of a better word.
mm,
how do you develop those teams and develop those cultures and have those benchmarks so that they're aware this is something we need you to focus on as well.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
it's
couldn't
really interesting. Sorry, Dom.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think this sort of critical thinking plus taste is like
Yeah.
the
Mm,
ultimate combination, really. And to build on what
Mm.
Amy said, AI is making average attainable by everyone. So consequently, it raises the bar for what is considered exceptional. And
Mm.
so I think to what we've discussed previously, and this idea about pie shaped, and if you're going to shape the inputs and to be able to evaluate the outputs, you do still need
Mm.
some expertise, right? To be
Yes.
able to look at something and go, is this truly
Mm.
great? And we had a speaker at Sun AI Summit this year called Sari Azut, who has this new
Mm.
mantra for herself, which is this un-LLMable? Is what
Yeah.
she's putting out into the world for us, like for the own sense of like pride and craft. Is this something that an LLM couldn't do? That's not to say she isn't using AI to sort of facilitate that brainstorming process and help her
Mm.
get to that point. Final output something that is un-LLMable, which I think is quite an interesting provocation. And I think if you
Mhm.
are if you're a marketing leader, or also maybe if you're the CEO as well, I think you need to be the one that is setting this bar. And as a consequence of that, you have to be ultra intentional about the sources of inspiration and knowledge that you're curating for yourself, your own like data set that you're building in here. And secondly,
Mm.
I also think that you need to bake in more time to reflect on what you actually like and what you don't. Why did you love that essay and not the other one? What is it about that
mm,
painting out there that made you stop and stare? Like,
Mm.
counterintuitive to the startup mode of being in like constant forward motion and constant execution, I do believe
Mm.
there is something to be said for paying a bit more attention to the world around you and what you are actually noticing and paying
Mhm.
attention to in this context. I think it's really, really important.
Yeah,
mm,
I totally agree with that. And I think, in this digital age, we are so distracted through short form content. Like our critical thinking has become so rapid fire when we start to look at, all of the things that are available to us. And it's so easy to be distracted. And that grounding practice certainly is a super important one to cut back through. I also love the idea of like all of us being accountability auditors when we're thinking about this in that lens. And it kind of ties into that unLLMable. It's like, okay, am I going to hold myself accountable for what came out of this? Like, this is my decision. I'm going to put this into market, or I'm going to put this thing on a slide, or I'm going to say XYZ. Like, am I holding myself accountable to this in this scenario? Am I able to work backwards from the thinking that was provided and say, actually, yeah, I agree and I align with the strategy. I'm going to put my stamp on it, right? And so, big piece of advice, and certainly learned this the hard way over a few times, but yeah, have your accountability auditor hat on in certain scenarios to go, yeah, I own that.
Mm. I love the
Yes, same.
It's
unLLMable
not very easy to say,
question.
unfortunately, but it's very
Yeah,
good to keep in
but
the
it's
back of
very
your
good to
mind.
remember. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like the framing. I guess the weird thing is, lovable and every other. I feel like it's basically a race to find where the limit is, effectively. And so you
Mhm.
probably, where what you think is currently unLLMable now may not be in a couple of weeks. So it's almost like a
Yeah.
moving target. And I had questions about, how like what this means for the future of like content marketing
Mm.
specifically, but I think that's kind of going to be covered in the next question, which is all around sort of execution and how you basically balance when you lean like fully or
Mm.
halfway um on AI versus when you are opting to rely solely on human intelligence within sort of a marketing team's context. Amy, if you got a few sort of comments to share on this one.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, and I know Lauren's got a super interesting POV on this as well, so I'll try and keep it short.
Mm,
But essentially, at WPP, we have this ethos or guiding principle, which essentially is our empathy gradient. So we think about things on a high empathy, low empathy scale. So on your high empathy, you're looking to augment the human. So that's all of your creative concepts, your aesthetics, your insight generation to a certain point where we're really looking to use AI to facilitate that quicker, faster learning. I think an interesting analogy when you think about this is, you can throw all of your Lego bricks on the table. In previous times, when I was a kid, it used to take me ages to put all the red blocks over there, the blue blocks over there, and now it allows you to organize those thoughts really quickly, right? And that is where we think about augmenting the human and giving them the capacity to organize those blocks fast so that then they can create creative concepts from that. On the low empathy scale, this is where we're thinking about automating the tasks, your data collection, your ad evaluation, optimization of these assets, all of that kind of stuff, where it doesn't require a huge amount of empathy to complete it. And to Lauren's point earlier around the multi-agent and outsourcing to those freelancers or whatever your model looks like, is where you can start automating the task. It's those repetitive things that come through again and again and again. And then, of course, you have the kind of stuff in the middle that's your like strategies and your campaign plans and your scaled content development that kind of sit in that middle bucket, have a bit of both.
mm,
And I think as we reflect back on a lot of what we share with clients is we kind of do like an empathy gradient check-in, and once you kind of get into the model of using this in a proactive way, you go, is this a high empathy task? Like, does it require
mm,
brand tone of voice, or is the human talent leading this? Like, what does this look like from a high empathy perspective? Is it a low empathy asset versioning, adding different logos on pages, very, very simple tasks? Or is it that middle ground? And that's, I think, where you can also add in the accountability auditor side of things to go,
mm.
okay, how am I going to hold myself accountable across the scale? And what does it look like in practicality? But I know Laura's got some this very quick snippet of the empathy scale. I know Laura's got a really interesting point of view
No,
as
I
well.
mean,
Yeah.
I think the framework, I really like how you
Mm,
Mm,
break it into that spectrum. I think the only thing I would add is what you mentioned earlier, Rhys, which is I
mm,
still have that thought in the back of my mind of
mm.
just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I
Should.
think
Hmm.
for startups, there are maybe two things that you could think about. One is, what would happen to your brand equity if people can tell that your content is purely AI generated?
Mm.
mm,
Um, maybe that doesn't seem like it's that. Maybe it depends on the type of audience you have. Maybe
True.
CP, I don't know. In our case, uh, we think that it would have a negative effect if people noticed.
Mm.
This, ironically, for being an AI company, actually. And secondly, what happens to your team's motivation if they are incentivized against doing things that they love to do?
mm,
So, for example, you could say on paper that I don't need to do copywriting anymore for Sana because we have all of these agents and stuff can be generated, but I love to write. And so I write. And I think that there's some value in that. It gives me as an individual and my contribution towards the organization a sense of it creates meaning there. I also think on top of that it makes me a better thinker, because to write is to think. And being a good thinker, to everything that Amy was talking about previously, matters more than ever in an AI first world. Are there some
Mm.
contexts where I will use it to use an agent to help me shortcut a process, or perhaps experiment to the point of exploration and try and learn if a channel has potential? Yes, but I'm not making some kind of blank just because we have AI agent capabilities that means I don't need to write anymore.
Yeah.
Mm. That was a very rousing case for for humans' capabilities. And I think it chimes quite closely with our thinking on the content marketing side of things, because we've been trying to put out more and more sort of founder guidance. And the reason we've been trying to do that is because within the portfolio we recognize that 90% of the queries that come through from founders are the same, and obviously the 10% is specific to their context, and so those foundations are the same, but making sure that we make it clear that that's sort of expert informed, and the added value of having experts that have reviewed it and adding comments to it is what we really hope gives it the human touch that it needs to make it well, to bring some feeling to it, in a sense, and also to recognize the reality of it, because I think that's one of the things that sort of AI generated content clearly doesn't necessarily do that well. This session has really flown by the way. So thank you very much for the brilliant contributions. Is there we always do a final word. Is there a final word, something that you wish you'd had a chance to say that you haven't had a chance to say before we wrap? Perhaps with Amy first.
Um, Gosh, thought about this.
As an unplanned
Uh,
question, sorry.
Unplanned question. That's okay. Look, I probably would go more broad than AI and go define your value set. I'm a
Mm,
huge person that, I have my core three values that are my guiding light, my guiding principle. I think having those defined in my life generally, but also when it comes to the application and the execution of AI, it allows me to ground in the reality of what I know to be true before I launch from there as well. So I guess it's more general life advice than AI specific,
mm,
but I use it in that capacity as well, is know your values, because they'll be
mm,
able to be that real safeguard when you're going, I'm navigating these super muddy, unclear, uncertain waters that are moving at rapid pace, and I feel like I'm a log running down a stream. You can go,
mm,
actually, I know my values are joy, curiosity, and unity, and I'm going to use those as my principles, my guiding points.
mm. Nice. Maintain your compass. Cool.
Yes.
Uh, Lauren, what's your final word?
Yeah, I think it's a really beautiful point. Perhaps I would just add, on top of something that we've discussed, to this point about AI raising the bar for what is considered exceptional. I think
Mm,
I
Mm,
would just add that I think that that's a really exciting thing.
mm,
And um, personally, I've been very, very motivated by that. Both in terms of, I mean, to give a specific example of the writing that I'm doing, both professionally and also outside of Sana, we yeah, we have that kind of potential to keep evolving and raising our bar, while hopefully also taking away some of the tasks that are preventing us from having more time and space to think about these things. I'm very
mm.
optimistic. Uh,
mm.
I'm optimistic for that.
I love that.
Nice. It feels like we return to colorful and illuminating in the end. So thank you very much, Lauren and Amy, for joining the session. It's been really, really interesting and insightful for us, and hopefully it has for everyone that's joined. And we'll be sharing a write-up as well, so you'll be able to kind of see what's been said, read through some of those notes, and hopefully be able to apply a lot of the things that have been discussed, particularly at the principal level, which is of course arguably the most important one.